Cuba began fighting for independence from Spain in 1895. The U.S. was interested in purchasing Cuba, and Americans wanted to join the war for several reasons. We were invested in Cuba because of trade, especially in sugar. The Spanish were controlling the Cubans with a policy of repression, and America's yellow press exaggerated the brutality of the situation, so Americans felt compelled to come to Cuba's aid. When the USS Maine exploded in Havana Harbor, we blamed the Spanish. The U.S. blockaded Cuba on April 22, 1898, and Spain declared war. U.S. President William McKinley officially declared war on Spain on April 25th. The U.S. began fighting in the Philippines at the Battle of Manila Bay on May 1st, and we defeated the Spanish there very quickly. Next, American troops landed at Guantanamo, Cuba on June 10th, and the Spanish surrendered a month later on July 17th. A week later, U.S. troops landed in Puerto Rico. A ceasefire was declared on August 1st, and Spain agreed to an unconditional surrender on August 10, 1898. The Treaty of Paris was signed by the U.S. and Spain on December 10, 1898, officially ending the war. As Secretary of State John Hay stated, "It was a splendid little war." Cuba was granted independence from Spain, and the U.S. held great influence there until 1902. We gained control of Puerto Rico and Guam, and we purchased the Philippines from Spain for $20 million. The U.S. also annexed Hawaii, Wake Island, and several of the Samoan Islands. Though less than 400 American soldiers were killed in combat, over 2,000 contracted yellow fever during the Spanish-American War. Yellow fever was first reported in Cuba in 1649, when one-third of Havana died from the disease. At the onset of the war, Spanish forces were few because many soldiers had been infected with yellow fever and were too ill to fight. U.S. troops suffered from the yellow fever, along with malaria and dysentery, during their time in Cuba. The causes of the diseases were traced to unsanitary conditions and mosquitoes. Even back home in the U.S., soldiers died from a deadly typhoid outbreak in the filthy training camps. An estimated 20,700 out of the 171,000 soldiers in the camps were infected, and 1,500 died. Number 1. Is the cause just? The U.S. entered war with Spain for several reasons. We sympathized with Cuba because Cubans were suffering under poor living conditions and their efforts against Spain were failing, so our intervention could be justified as a humanitarian cause. However, other factors contributing to the war, such as seeking revenge for the explosion of the USS Maine and our investment in Cuban trade, can't be justified. In conclusion, the Spanish-American War was fought offensively by the U.S., so the cause is not justified. Number 2. Was the war lawfully declared? U.S. President William McKinley officially declared war on Spain on April 25, 1898. Because our president is a lawful authority, the war was lawfully declared. Number 3. Did we have good intentions behind the war? The U.S. sympathized for Cuban revolutionaries who were facing brutal Spanish tactics. Our goal was to establish a stable government that would maintain order and ensure peace, tranquility, and security in Cuba. The U.S. did have good intentions behind the war because we were trying to restore a just peace in Cuba. Number 4. Was war the last resort? Before declaring war, the U.S. delivered an ultimatum to Spain. The ultimatum required the Spanish to acknowledge Cuban independence and give up control there, promise that the U.S. wouldn't attempt to annex Cuba, and authorize the U.S. to use whatever military measures deemed necessary to guarantee Cuban independence. The Spanish rejected the ultimatum and declared war, and Americans did the same. War was not the last resort because the U.S. did not try diplomacy, economic sanctions, or international pressure before going to war. Number 5. Did we have a reasonable chance of success? The U.S. was well equipped in both machines and manpower throughout the war. In fact, so many men volunteered to fight that many never got the chance to go to battle. Considering the U.S. won the war very quickly, without significant losses or damage, it is safe to say that we had a reasonable chance of success going into the war. Number 6. Was the goal proportional to offense? Because we were not attacked by the Spanish before going to war, any attack on Spain would have been unproportional. That said, our offense on Spain can't be justified. Now that we have discussed each individual factor of the Spanish-American War, we can determine whether the war itself was justified. Though the Spanish-American War was lawfully declared, American intentions were good, and we had a reasonable chance of success, the war was not justified because all 6 factors were not met.